Okay, so let's solve this case together. This is from paper for transfer pricing for December 2023, case number 1. You can pause here and read the content of that case and the questions, but on high level, this case describes a multinational group of companies that is involved in manufacturing, distribution, and sale of GPS tracking products for the agricultural sector. And the structure of the group includes several companies. The parent company, which is responsible for R&D and it seems like strategic management too. Then there is a central manufacturing company, and then there are a couple of distributors. And then the questions that we are asked is question number 1, delineate the transactions between associated entities. Then question 2 is to perform a functional analysis and characterize the entities. And then question number 3 is to provide a critical analysis regarding the transfer pricing methods that can be applied. So let's start with delineating the transactions, and I'll show you the logic and the workflow that you can utilize in your exam. So question 1, delineate the transactions between associated enterprises or entities within the ATS group. Make sure that you read the question carefully and understand it before you actually start solving, because sometimes people just answer the wrong question. To delineate the transactions, we need to first identify all associated entities. And if we read through the case, there is the first entity that we know or we notice is AG Tracker Ltd, which is an ultimate parent entity. It conducts research and development, creates new tracking systems, and improves the design, employs a number of highly skilled technical staff, including qualified electronic engineers and those possessing information technology-related qualifications. And it also has a legal ownership of the intellectual property. All that information is pretty important for delineation, but the first step is obviously to identify the entity. Then entity number 2 is AG Tracker Manco, which is a subsidiary of ATL, and it is responsible for the manufacturing of all of the ATS products. And it utilizes the design information and intellectual property of ATL, the parent company. It pays a royalty, which is directly an indication of transaction for the use of know-how. And then ATM also sells finished products to 2 other entities. Great. So we have identified 2 entities so far, and 2 more are coming now. Those are distributors. So ATD call number 1, domiciled in country C, purchase finished goods from ATM. That's transaction, and then distributes them to the end customers, which is not an associated entity transaction, but nevertheless. And ATA pays a royalty to ATL for the use of intellectual property attached to the products it sells to end customers. And then entity number 2 seems to be very similar. I think the text is copy-pasted. It also pays a royalty for the use of intellectual property to ATL. So that's pretty clear. And then each distributor has an office, employs staff involved in activities, etc., etc. Also marketing and sales, also pretty important. Gives a highly technical nature of the products and their applications. Marketing and sales staff need to possess strong technical knowledge and communicate this to potential customers in the agricultural sector. All right, so let's start with delineation. The way I like doing it, and probably most of transfer pricing people typically would do that, they would draw an illustration of the group structure and transaction flows. So we have ATL. Let me use a little bit thinner pencil. ATL. Then we have the ATM company, a manufacturer. Oops. ATM. And then we have ATD code 1, ATD code 2. So we have identified 4 entities total. ATD code 1 and ATD code 2. sorry for my terrible writing. And then let's track the transactions. So it seems that, let's go from the ATM entity perspective. It's responsible for the manufacturing of all the products and utilizes the design information and intellectual property. It pays a royalty, that's transaction number 1. And then, let's highlight that. And then it also sells finished products to distributors. So that would be our transaction 1. ATL provides IP to ATM, and then ATM is selling goods to ATD Co1 and ATD Co2. Pretty straightforward. Then let's go further. ATD Co is domiciled in country C, purchase finished goods from ATM. We covered that transaction. That's our transaction number 2. Yeah, I need to have the number here. Yeah, that transaction is covered. And then ATD Co1 pays a royalty to ATL, this transaction, for the use of intellectual property attached to the products it sells to end customers, which is, I wouldn't say a typical transaction in this sense, but yeah, let's just do, our task is just delineate them for now. That would be transaction number 3. And then there is a similar transaction where ATD Co pays a royalty to ATL for use of intellectual property. This transaction, we can say that's transaction number 4, even though in nature it's very similar to the previous transaction, just different entities involved. Let's call it transaction number 4. You can call those 2 transactions, which is ATM selling to ATD Co1 and ATD Co2, also as separate transactions, but again, it's not really crucial. You just need to mention them when you will be writing. It seems we delineated all the transactions, and I think the tricky part here is that if you would be doing the, if it wouldn't be mentioning directly things like royalty payments and sale of goods, but just functions that entities perform, you would need to hypothesize more about what the transactions actually are, meaning like intellectual property, the way that company accesses it, and what transaction that could be. And sales, you may be assumed, but not directly mentioned. So for some cases, you may need to be more creative. But in this case, I think it's pretty straightforward. Then perform a functional analysis of the ATS group and characterize the entities. That's task number 2. Let's do it. So we have 3 functional profiles in this company, which is ATL, a parent company. We have ATM, which is a manufacturer, and we have 2 distributors, ATD Co1 and ATD Co2. We can safely aggregate ATD Co1 and Co2 and analyze them together, just because it's exactly the same functional profile that they have. Therefore, we don't need to have separate functional analysis for this purpose. So let's go with task number 2. The way you would describe that in the exam is typically through some kind of text description, where you can check previous papers' suggested answers. You can check in my course how that's being done. Here, I'm just providing you a content, and then you just need to put that in words and describe that. Unfortunately, you cannot draw in your exam answers. How you would do function analysis, you would probably list a set of crucial functions that entities perform. And it's a little bit tricky for IP transactions. So let's maybe start with more straightforward transactions, which is, let's do it like that. We have ATL, we have ATM, and we have ATD Co1 and ATD Co2. And then here we can list functions that those companies perform. And then function analysis is not only about functions, but also about risks. So yeah, let's go with that. And we will also have to describe assets. Let's start with manufacturing, because I think that's the most straightforward. ATM is performing manufacturing. And you can just use the description from the text. It says that it is responsible for the manufacturing for all products utilizing the design information intellectual property of ATL. Let's go with the second straightforward function, which is a distribution. Distribution is performed clearly by those two entities, ATD code 1, ATD code 2, and then R&D activities are all centralized in ATL. That seems to be the case. And then what I would suggest mentioning in terms of functional analysis is also, what have I done? Is also support of the customers. I think that's a crucial function too in this regard. Customer support, which is clearly performed by ATD code 1 and 2. And what else? Yeah, it's not really clear here who is taking care of marketing activities. I think those are pretty crucial. It's probably split in some way between ATL and ATD code 1 and code 2, but I would suggest mentioning it and making some assumptions around it. I think marketing is pretty crucial for most of business models, and I'm not sure why they didn't describe that in the case, but that's really important to mention that, because if ATD code 1 and code 2 perform significant marketing activities, then those are clearly not limited risk distributors, while currently we may claim they are. But let's see. I think yeah, sorry. I think I missed one thing here. Each distributor has an office and employs staff involved in the activities, including administration, procurement, marketing, and sales. So we can assume they're performing marketing and sales, and then communicate with potential customers. This customer support we already covered. Yes, so I would say that ATL we can just not mention marketing overall, which clearly makes ATD code 1 and code 2 not limited risk distributors. But let's go. That will be the next step. We first need also to describe risks and assets. So let's go with risks. So what are the risks? I think it's not really clear from this case. The risks are not really described well. So we will have to do more assumptions than use the actual information. So some information is available and clear. R&D risk. So risk of unsuccessful R&D activities is clearly with R&D company and headquarter company, ultimate parent company, ATL. Then manufacturing risks, not clear, but we can assume that ATM is more of fully fledged manufacturer. It may be a contract manufacturer, we don't know, but we may assume, and we would describe those assumptions, that ATM is a contractor, or if we assume it's a contract manufacturer, then we can say that manufacturing risk is limited or non-existent. If it's a fully fledged manufacturer, we can say it is it has manufacturing risk. Then there are a lot of other risks that we could describe, which is market risk, which is a credit risk, foreign exchange risk, and other types of risks. You should know all of them or most of them. But here we don't have much of information, so let's just make again some assumptions. Let's mention market risk. And then it seems like market risk is primarily with distributors, because it doesn't seem that they are guaranteed with any return from this discussion, from this case. And yeah, I would skip the rest of the risks for now, just because I don't think we have enough information. But if you have time, you can describe and hypothesize about what kind of risks they could also have. And assets. So there are clearly two types of assets that we would need to describe, which is tangible and intangible assets. So let's start with tangible. Tangible in this case seems to be manufacturing capabilities, manufacturing assets, which are clearly with ATM, which is the main manufacturer in the group. And then let's go with inventory and working capital. Do we know that? Let's check. ATM is responsible for the manufacturing. It sells to distributors, purchases from ATM, it distributes to the end customers. Yeah, so it seems we don't have that information here. No, we don't know that. I would say you can allocate it where you want. Let's assume it is with distributors in this case. In this case, yeah, you can say that ATD entities are not limited to distributors. That's another argument for them not being. If the inventory would be with a manufacturer, then that would be the argument for ATM being a more substantial manufacturer profile. I think from the risk perspective, we also don't have information about guarantees. That's something I should mention. If the customer is dissatisfied with the product or product doesn't work, who takes the risk? And again, if that's a manufacturer, then you should mention that. If that's a distributor, you should mention that. We don't have that information in this case. You can mention it and make some assumption. You can ignore it, but mention that there are those other risks that could be significant, and since we don't have information, we don't know how to allocate them. I think what is more important here is also intangible assets. And that's a little bit tricky here because we also have limited information about some of them, but we clearly know that ATL has legal ownership of all of the ATS intellectual property. That's a legal ownership. That doesn't automatically mean economic ownership. But we clearly also see that ATL is performing R&D activities and develops new products and designs. So I would say that intangible property related to things like, let's just also check about ATM, responsible for all products utilizing the design information and intellectual property provided by ATL. For the use of know-how, yes. So no manufacturing know-how, product designs, are both with ATL. And whatever other way you would want to describe the intellectual property that ATL owns, you can describe it in a more substantial way, depending on the time you would have. But yeah, I think those two are the most important: product designs and manufacturing. The other thing is we don't have much information about marketing intangibles. And also, I think there is a little bit of vague definition of the intellectual property that distributors have. So marketing and sales staff need to possess the strong technical knowledge and communicate this to potential customers. So you may say that, that can be treated as part of marketing intangible for such a specific industry. that can be treated as a separate skill set and separate set of intangibles, which would be something like just technical knowledge. And I would assume that in this case, let's separate them. You would allocate technical knowledge to ATDs, while also mentioning ATL for it. Do we know if ATM has any highly specialized personnel? Let's check. ATM is a wholly owned subsidiary responsible for manufacturing. It just utilizes the data information, pays royalty. Yeah, don't have much of information there, so we won't mention that. And then marketing intangibles is a little bit tricky here, because we could assume that ATL also contributes and owns them, because what is stated here is that ATL has the legal ownership over all of the ATS intellectual property, so maybe it performs limited marketing function like protection. You could also, if you have time, go go deeper with DEMPI analysis, and then supplement the functional analysis with them. But okay, let's assume that primarily this is done by ATDs. And then let's go with, I think we're done with functional analysis. Yeah, sorry, we need to characterize the entities too. So ATL would be the R&D entity. Is it an entrepreneur? We don't know. We don't know how the profits are being allocated in this group. So it may be, and you may describe that, but it may also be just compensated for its R&D activities. The same about manufacturer. So you may make a case that this manufacturer is a contract manufacturer. You may also make a case that it's a fully fledged manufacturer, FFM. I would probably lean towards contract manufacturer here in this case, but and then the reason for that would be that it has some manufacturing assets, but not much. We don't know, and we don't have information about manufacturing risks, so it may be limited manufacturing risk, therefore it's contract manufacturing. Yes, it performs manufacturing function, but that's basically all it does. And it uses the assets, intangible assets of R&D entity. So yeah, I think I would lean towards contract manufacturing in this case and describe it like that. And then those distributors would probably be fully fledged distributors, FFDs. The reason for that being that it does significant customer support, and it seems to perform significant marketing activities, therefore contributing to the marketing assets and developing them. We don't have information about how the risks are allocated, but it may be getting involved into market risk and therefore getting residual profit from sales. Yes, it pays for technical knowledge to R&D entity, but well, how significant is that? We don't really know. Therefore, I would say yes, those two distributors are full-fledged distributors. All right, so let's go to the question number 3, which is to provide a critical analysis regarding which transfer price methods may be applied to the associated transactions within the ATS group. Okay, and so here we will need to go back to the transactions that we have. We have 2 royalty transactions. Transaction number 1, where ATM is paying to ATL for royalties. And then transaction number 3 and 4, where ATD Co1 and Co2 pays for a royalty for the use of intellectual property attached to the products itself to end customers. So we don't really know what that means. But yeah, we will have to make a few assumptions. And then transaction number 2, which is we combined together as one, but we could separate that, is when ATM manufacturer sells to ATD Co1 and ATD Co2. Okay, let's go with this. Transaction number 1. that was royalty from ATM, the contract manufacturer, to ATL, the R&D entity. The economic analysis and method selection with limited information is always tricky, so you don't really know which method is good in this case because we don't have much of information. You have several ways of answering this question. You could go method by method. That's approach number one. So you would go with CAP analysis or CAP method potential application, and then go to the next method, and then to the next method, and then you will end with profit split method, and then you would conclude if each method is applicable and what would be the scenarios under which each method would be applicable. That's the best way to do it, but that's the most time-consuming way. The other approach is jump to which best method, basically. So you make a case why you think the particular method is applied and why. I think if you feel that you have enough of time, go with approach one. If you don't have enough time, go with approach two. I will just quickly walk you through how I would approach how I would do both approaches. So let's go with method by method. ATM pays some royalty for the use of manufacturing intellectual property know-how primarily to R&D entity. The first method is Comparable Uncontrolled Price. The first question we would ask, do you have any internal comparables? Does ATL provide any similar know-how to any unrelated manufacturers? The assumption is probably not. But if yes, we could use that potentially as a comparable. Then we would go with Resale Price Method, which is clearly not applicable to this transaction involving R&D. We would then go to Resale Price Method, also not applicable here. Sorry, the resale is not applicable. Cost plus. R&D is clearly seems to be more entrepreneurial entity. We don't want to compensate it on the cost plus basis. Manufacturer, we could make a case that we could test manufacturer overall on the cost plus basis and take into account all the transactions that it has, including distribution. But I would say, since we're trying to clearly delineate the transactions and don't do any aggregations, I would say that cost plus is also not applicable here. Then TNMM, potentially applicable, but on higher degree of aggregation, saying that we could say that if the manufacturer earns arm's length manufacturer return after paying the royalty, then it is, since it's characterized as contract manufacturer, then the royalty payment is also arm's length. That's one of the arguments that you could use. If you have time, mention it. If you don't, then go to the profit split. So profit split would maybe the good method here if the manufacturer contributes somehow to the R&D or intangible assets. If it doesn't and it only really uses the IP provided, then it probably is not the best method. And then we can circle back to CAP method and say, okay, it seems that we may just try to find the potentially comparable royalty agreements in the royalty database and use it for CAP analysis of the royalty. If the functional profiles are more complex and ATM plays a more significant role, let's go with profit split. Those two are probably the best scenarios here, and then testing it on TNMM basis as a whole, it can be the backup method. That's how I would describe approach one. And approach two would be just the summary of approach. The approach two would be the summary of approach one, just mention CAP, profit split, and then TNMM as a backup, and don't go through all the methods. Then let's go with transaction two, which is the distribution, sorry, the sale of products from ATM to ATD code 1 and code 2. Let's just note this down. Sale of goods ATM to ATDs. Yeah, so again, you could use approach 1, approach 2. I would just default to approach 2 in this case. It seems that ATM is a contract manufacturer. I would still ask questions about internal comparables. Does ATM hypothetically sell goods directly to other distributors in other jurisdictions, maybe or even in the same jurisdictions, and those are third parties? We could potentially use that information. If that is the case, then you could use several methods. You could potentially use CUP, you could use cost plus and test ATM's profitability. And then probably the answer is no, they don't sell, manufacturer doesn't sell directly to other distributors. And then in this case, you need to use TNMM probably in this case. And then if you use TNMM, you have to decide who is the tested party. It seems that from those two companies, ATM or two profiles, ATM is a contract manufacturer, while ATD is a more complex distributor. Therefore, I would say ATM, TNMM, cost plus, or that would be cool if you mention return on assets as an alternative PLI that you could use here for manufacturer, and even you can also mention return on capital, and that also may work. And then the third transaction and the fourth one, which is again like we could probably, let's do it like that because they're the same, is royalty from ATDs to ATM. Oh, sorry, ATL, the R&D entity. Not really clear what type of royalty they pay for, because what the case says is ATD code 1 or 2 pays a royalty for use of the intellectual property attached to the products it sells to end customers. Not sure what that means, because if the intellectual property is within a product, does it mean that it's like software that is being licensed? But then why do distributors pay for it? Not clear. Or is it a payment for know-how how to serve the customers and answer their complex questions? Maybe that's the case. But anyway, I think in this case, what I would do is you can use answer from question 1 as a starting point, actually, and use the same approach, because I think the conclusion is ultimately the same. Does ATL get any royalties from third-party distributors that do the same stuff? If yes, that's our potential CUP. Resale price and cost plus probably not applicable. TNMM probably not applicable to complex parties, complex transaction. IP transactions don't like TNMM. And then profit split could be the case if ATDs are contributing somehow to those royalties in terms of DEMP. Sorry, not royalties, but IP. And the argument for that would be that distributors have highly technical, strong technical knowledge and communicate this to potential customers. So this technical knowledge could be an indication that they just so that they kind of contribute to that asset, not just use it. And then this profit split may be a little bit more complex. So to summarize, potentially CUP, potentially you could search database for it, but nowadays tax authorities and OECD doesn't really like that, but you can describe that approach. And then profit split, good description of the MP functions and considerations there would be good. You don't have much information, but just demonstrate there that you know what you're talking about. And depending on different parameters, you would have different answers. Yeah, I think that's it. So make sure you describe that well in your paper. in your answer, and I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. In my course, I walk through other cases like that, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And if you are interested in increasing your chances to pass the ADIT transfer pricing exam, consider my course at www.starttax.com. Thank you, and bye for today.